I'm Sarah Matthews, 32, and 8 months ago, I thought I had everything: a loving husband, a successful marketing career, and a baby on the way. Then David, my husband of 5 years, walked out on me when I was 8 months pregnant, claiming he needed space to figure things out. The betrayal nearly broke me, but I picked up the pieces for my daughter. What I didn't expect was seeing his secretary, Jessica, sitting in that courtroom today, her own pregnant belly visible beneath her. Designer dress. The same woman who had always been just a colleague was now carrying his child, a child conceived while I was growing his first one. But as I sat there, watching David's confident smirk fade when our lawyer presented the evidence, I realized this courtroom wasn't just about custody or support. It was about to expose secrets that would change everything. For all of us, Dodd, if you've ever felt betrayed by someone you trusted completely, you'll understand why this story needed to be told. The silver-framed wedding photo on my nightstand used to make me smile every morning. David and I looked so radiant, so certain of our future together. He was 29, I was 27, and we believed we had all the time in the world to build our dreams. We met at a marketing conference in Chicago. David was the ambitious sales director for a tech startup, and I was establishing myself as a freelance marketing consultant. Our first conversation lasted 3 hours over coffee, ranging from business strategies to our shared love of hiking and travel. When he asked for my number, I knew something special was beginning. Our courtship was everything I dreamed of. David was attentive, thoughtful, and genuinely interested in my career aspirations. He supported my decision to start my own marketing firm, even helped me land my first major client through his connections. We complemented each other perfectly. His natural charisma and my strategic thinking made us a formidable team. The proposal came during a weekend getaway to the mountains we both loved. David had planned everything meticulously, right down to the photographer hiding behind the trees to capture the moment. "Sarah," he said, dropping to one knee beside the waterfall, where we'd shared our first kiss, "I want to build a life with you. I want to grow old with you. Will you marry me?" The ring was perfect at classic solitaire that caught the sunlight streaming through the pine trees. I said yes without hesitation, already envisioning our future together. We talked about children that very afternoon, agreeing we wanted to wait a few years to establish our careers first. Our wedding was intimate but beautiful, held in my parents' backyard with 50 of our closest friends and family. David's vows brought tears to my eyes. "Sarah, you make me want to be the best version of myself. I promise to support your dreams, to be your partner in everything, and to love you through whatever life brings us." The early years of our marriage were golden. My business flourished, and David climbed the corporate ladder, eventually becoming vice president of sales at a growing software company. We bought our first house, a charming craftsman bungalow with a big backyard where we planned to watch our future children play. When we decided to start trying for a baby last year, it felt like the natural next step. We were financially stable, deeply in love, and ready to expand our family. When I saw those 2 pink lines on the pregnancy test, I could barely contain my excitement. David's reaction was everything I'd hoped for: pure joy, followed by protective tenderness. "We're going to be parents," he whispered, holding me close in our kitchen. "I can't wait to meet our little one." Those early months of pregnancy were blissful. David came to every doctor's appointment, his eyes wide with wonder as we heard the heartbeat for the first time. He read pregnancy books voraciously, prepared the nursery with meticulous care, and talked to my belly every night before bed. "Hello, little one," he'd say, his hand resting on my growing bump. "This is Daddy. I can't wait to meet you and show you the world." Looking back now, I wonder when exactly things started to change. Was it gradual, or did I simply miss the signs because I was so focused on our growing family? All I know is that somewhere between those early months of shared excitement and the moment he walked out our door, the man I married disappeared, leaving behind someone I barely recognized. The first crack in our perfect facade appeared around my 5th month of pregnancy. David's phone had become his constant companion, buzzing with messages at all hours. He'd grown protective of it in a way that felt foreign and unsettling. Work emergency, he'd mumble, stepping out of the room to take calls that seemed to come every evening. When I asked about the increased workload, he'd give vague answers about a big project that required his immediate attention. I told myself it was normal. David had always been ambitious, and his company was expanding rapidly. The tech industry demanded long hours and constant availability. But the man who used to share every detail of his workday had become secretive, distracted. The late nights started gradually. First, it was one evening a week, then two, then almost every night. David would come home after 10 p.m., claiming he'd been in meetings or working on presentations. When I suggested he bring work home so we could at least be in the same room, he'd insist that the office environment was more conducive to his concentration. "You need your rest anyway," he'd say, kissing my forehead dismissively. "Growing a baby is exhausting work." His concern felt hollow, like words he thought he should say rather than genuine care. The David the first married would have wanted to be close to me during this precious time, not finding excuses to stay away. Jessica Martinez had worked as David's executive assistant for 2 years. I'd met her briefly at company holiday parties, a polished woman in her late 20s with an MBA and clear ambitions. She was efficient, professional, and according to David, invaluable to his success. "Jessica really knows how to handle the clients," he'd tell me. "She's got great instincts for what they need." I'd noticed how his face would light up when he mentioned her, the same way it used to when he talked about our future together. When I mentioned this observation, he laughed it off. "She's just good at her job, Sarah. You're being hormonal." The word hormonal became his go-to dismissal for any concern I raised, worried about our finances. Hormonal, feeling disconnected from him. Hormonal, wanting to spend time together. Hormonal. By my 7th month, the distance between us had become a chasm. David's side of the bed felt cold even when he was in it. Our conversations had dwindled to logistics, doctor appointments, nursery preparations, household maintenance. The intimacy that had once defined our relationship had vanished. One evening, I found him in his home office, door closed, speaking in hushed tones. Through the thin walls, I could hear fragments of conversation that didn't sound like business. "I know it's complicated," he was saying, "but we have to be careful about timing." When I knocked on the door, the conversation ended abruptly. David emerged looking flustered, his phone quickly pocketed. "Who was that?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. "Just Jessica going over tomorrow's schedule," he replied. But he wouldn't meet my eyes. The name that had once meant nothing to me was beginning to fill me with dread. Jessica's presence in our lives had grown larger while mine seemed to shrink. She knew David's schedule better than I did, understood his moods and preferences, shared his professional victories and challenges. I started paying attention to the small things. The way David's mood would improve after certain phone calls. How he developed new preferences, a different cologne, a change in his coffee order, music I'd never heard him listen to before. He was becoming someone I didn't recognize, influenced by a life I wasn't part of. The baby kicks that used to bring him running now barely earned a distracted glance. The nursery we'd planned together sat half-finished, David claiming he was too busy to complete the projects we'd started. Our weekly date nights had disappeared, replaced by his work obligations. When I tried to address these changes, David would become defensive, sometimes even angry. "I'm working hard for our family," he'd say. "I thought you'd appreciate that I'm trying to provide for our child." But it wasn't about money or providing, it was about presence, about partnership, about the emotional connection that had been the foundation of our marriage. That connection was eroding, and I felt powerless to stop it. The most painful part was the growing certainty that David was pulling away from not just me, but from the idea of our family altogether. The man who had once talked excitedly about teaching our child to ride a bike now seemed burdened by the approaching reality of fatherhood. I spent many nights lying awake, one hand on my growing belly, wondering if I was imagining the changes, or if my husband was truly becoming a stranger. The baby would kick as if sensing my distress, and I'd whisper reassurances that I wasn't sure I believed myself. "It's going to be okay, little one," I'd murmur. "Daddy's just scared. Things will get better once you're here." But deep down, I was beginning to suspect that David's distance wasn't about fear. It was about choice. And he was choosing something or someone else. The letter was waiting for me on our kitchen table when I came home from my doctor's appointment. My hands shook as I read the neat handwriting. David's careful script that had once penned love letters, now delivering the cruelest blow of my life. "Sarah, I need space to figure things out. This isn't working for me anymore. I'm staying at a hotel for now. I'll be in touch about arrangements. David." 22 words. 5 years of marriage, 8 months of pregnancy, a lifetime of dreams reduced to 22 cold. Impersonal words on a piece of paper. I read it 3 times before the words truly sank in. My 8-month pregnant body felt heavy as I sank into the kitchen chair. The same chair where David had sat just that morning, quietly eating breakfast while scrolling through his phone. He'd kissed my forehead goodbye, a perfunctory gesture I now realized was his farewell. The doctor's appointment had been routine. Our baby girl was healthy, developing beautifully, due in just 4 weeks. I'd been excited to share the updates with David, to show him the latest ultrasound pictures. Instead, I found myself alone in the house we'd chosen together, surrounded by the baby preparations that now seemed like monuments to my naivety. I called his phone immediately. It went straight to voicemail. I tried again, then again. On the 5th attempt, I left a message, my voice cracking with desperation. "David, please call me. We need to talk about this. You can't just leave a note. We're having a baby in a month. Please, just call me." He didn't call that night, or the next day, or the day after that dot. The silence was deafening. I found myself checking my phone obsessively, hoping for any sign that this was temporary, that he'd come to his senses. But the only messages were from concerned friends and family who'd noticed his absence from our usual social media post. My mother arrived 2 days later, having sensed something was wrong in my distracted phone calls. She found me sitting in the nursery, staring at the crib David had assembled with such care just months earlier. "Honey, what's happened?" she asked, her voice gentle but worried. When I showed her the letter, her face went through a series of emotions: shock, anger, fierce protectiveness. "That coward," she whispered. "How dare he do this to you now?" The next weeks passed in a blur of disbelief and preparation. Friends rallied around me, offering support and practical help. My business partner, Michelle, took over most of my client responsibilities. My sister flew in from Seattle to help with final baby preparations, but none of their love could fill the hole David had left. I felt like I was preparing for the most important moment of my life with half my heart missing. The man who was supposed to be my partner, my support, my teammate in this incredible journey, had simply vanished. The worst part was the not knowing. Was this temporary? Was he having some kind of breakdown? Was there someone else? The questions consumed me, but David remained unreachable, his phone continuing to go straight to voicemail. I learned from his office that he'd taken a leave of absence, citing personal reasons. His secretary, Jessica, was apparently handling his responsibilities. When I called the office directly, she was polite but unhelpful. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Matthews, but Mr. Matthews isn't available." Would you like me to take a message? Her voice was professional, but I detected something else, an undercurrent of knowledge, of secrets she wasn't sharing. When I asked if she knew where David was staying, she claimed she didn't have that information. The legal reality hit me hard. David had every right to leave our marriage, even now. While abandonment during pregnancy was morally reprehensible, it wasn't illegal. I consulted with a lawyer who explained my rights regarding child support and custody, but the immediate problem remained. I was about to give birth alone. The emotional toll was devastating. I'd wake up reaching for David, forgetting for a moment that he was gone. I'd catch myself about to share something with him, a funny moment, a concern about the baby, a random thought before remembering that he'd chosen not to be part of. These final precious weeks, friends tried to fill the gap. My mother moved into the guest room. My sister coordinated a support network, but none of them could replace the man who was supposed to be there, who should have been excited about meeting his daughter, who had once promised to love me through whatever life brings us. The baby seemed to sense my distress. She moved restlessly, responding to my elevated stress levels. I tried to stay calm for her sake, practicing the breathing techniques David and I had learned in childbirth class. Together, another cruel reminder of the partnership I'd lost. "It's okay, little one," I'd whisper, rubbing my belly. "Mommy's scared too, but we're going to be okay. I promise I'll take care of you." But even as I made that promise, I wondered how I'd manage. Single motherhood had never been part of my plan. I'd always imagined sharing those first precious moments with David, navigating the challenges of new parenthood together. The abandonment changed something fundamental in me. The trusting, optimistic woman who'd believed in happily ever, after it was replaced by someone harder, more cautious. I still love David. That kind of love doesn't disappear overnight, but I was beginning to understand that love wasn't enough to sustain a marriage when only one person was committed to it. As my due date approached, I made peace with the reality that I'd be facing one of life's most significant moments without the man who'd helped create this miracle. It wasn't the story I'd planned, but it was the story I'd been given. And I was determined to write the next chapter on my own terms. The contractions started at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after David's departure. I'd been having practice contractions for days, but these were different, deeper, more insistent, impossible to ignore. The hospital bracelet they gave me bore only my name, Sarah Matthews, single mother. Those 2 words, single mother, felt foreign and final. I'd never imagined wearing that label, never prepared for the reality of facing labor and delivery alone. My mother was there, of course, holding my hand and advocating for me with the medical staff, but the space where David should have been felt enormous, a void that no amount of love from family and friends could fill. Labor was intense and frightening in ways I hadn't expected. The childbirth classes David and I had attended together had prepared us for partnership, him as my coach, me as the one doing the work. Without him, I felt unmoored, like I was navigating without a compass. "You're doing great, honey," my mother kept saying, but I could see the worry in her eyes. She was trying to be strong for me, but she was also processing her own anger at David's absence. The nurses were kind but professional. They'd clearly seen this before, women giving birth without partners for various reasons. They didn't ask questions, just provided the care and support I needed. But I caught their sympathetic glances, the way they spoke a little more gently, offered a little more comfort. Emma Sarah Matthews came into the world at 6:47 a.m., weighing 7 pounds, 2 ounces. The moment they placed her on my chest, everything else faded away. The pain, the fear, the heartbreak, none of it mattered in that instant. She was perfect, with David's dark hair and what looked like my stubborn chin. "Hello, beautiful girl," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "I'm your mama. I've been waiting so long to meet you." She opened her eyes dark blue like all newborns and seemed to look right at me. In that moment, I felt a love so fierce and protective that it redefined everything I thought I knew about the capacity of the human heart. The nurses offered to call David, but I declined. He'd made his choice, and I wouldn't beg him to be part of this moment. If he wanted to know about his daughter's birth, he could ask Dot. The first days home were a blur of feeding schedules, diaper changes, and the overwhelming responsibility of keeping this tiny human alive and thriving. My mother stayed for 2 weeks, helping me navigate the basics of newborn care. But even with her support, I felt the weight of solo parenthood settling on my shoulders. The hardest moments came at night, during those quiet feeding sessions when the world felt still and intimate. I'd hold Emma close, watching her peaceful face as she nursed and feel the acute absence of the man who should have been there sharing these precious moments. "Your daddy is missing out on so much," I'd whisper to her. "But that's his loss, not ours." I established routines that worked for us, just Emma and me. I learned to read her cues, to distinguish between her different cries, to find comfort in the rhythm of our days together. My business partner, Michelle, handled most of my client work, but I managed to do some consulting from home. Emma sleeping in her bouncy seat beside my desk. The support from friends and family was overwhelming. Meals appeared on my doorstep, gifts arrived for Emma, and my phone buzzed constantly with check-ins and offers of help. But even surrounded by love, I felt the isolation of single motherhood, the weight of every decision, every worry, every sleepless night falling on my shoulders alone. 3 weeks after Emma's birth, I finally heard from David. Not a phone call or a visit, but a text message. "Heard about the baby. Hope you're both doing well. We'll be in touch about arrangements." The casualness of it took my breath away. Arrangements, as if our daughter was a business matter to be handled, not a miracle he'd helped create. I stared at the message for a long time, waiting for the follow-up, the explanation, the apology that never came. I didn't respond. What was there to say? That Emma was beautiful and healthy? That she had his eyes and my temperament? That she deserved a father who wanted to be part of her life? He could have learned all of that if he'd shown up, if he'd cared enough to try. Instead, I focused on building a life for Emma and me. I converted the guest room into a proper nursery, painted soft yellow walls, and hung pictures of our little family of 2. I researched childcare options and began planning my return to work. I opened a savings account for Emma's future and started a photo album documenting her first days. The nights were the hardest. When Emma would wake for her 2 a.m. feeding, I'd sit in the rocking chair David had assembled, holding our daughter in the dark, processing the magnitude of what had happened to our family. I grieved not just for my marriage, but for the family dynamic I'd envisioned, the shared responsibilities, the joint decisions, the teamwork of raising a child together. But I also discovered strength I didn't know I possessed. Every day I kept Emma safe, fed, and loved was a victory. Every milestone I witnessed, her first smile, her first giggle, the way she'd calm when she heard my voice, was a reminder that I was capable of being everything she needed. The hospital bracelet sat in my jewelry box, a tangible reminder of the day everything changed. Some nights I'd hold it, remembering the fear and uncertainty of that morning. But mostly, I looked forward to Emma's future, to the life we'd build together, to the strength I was discovering one day at a time. "We're going to be okay," I'd tell Emma during those quiet moments. Better than okay. "We're going to be happy." And slowly, surprisingly, I began to believe it. The business card sat on my kitchen table for 3 days before I found the courage to make the call. Marcus Chun, private investigator, was embossed in simple black letters on cream-colored cardstock. My lawyer had given it to me during our consultation about child support and custody arrangements. "If you suspect there's more to David's departure than he's telling you," she'd said, "Marcus is the best in the city. He's discreet, thorough, and he specializes in cases like yours. Cases like mine. The phrase made my situation sound common, routine. But to me, it still felt impossible. The man I'd married, the father of my child, had simply vanished from our lives without explanation. Emma was napping in her bassinet when I finally dialed the number. The phone rang twice before a calm professional voice answered. Chen Investigations, this is Marcus. Hi, I'm not sure if I need a private investigator, I began, already second-guessing myself. My name is Sarah Matthews. My lawyer, Jennifer Walsh, gave me your card. Mrs. Matthews, Jennifer mentioned you might call. Why don't you tell me what's going on? There was something reassuring about his voice, steady, non-judgmental, patient. I found myself explaining the whole story. David's gradual distance during my pregnancy, his sudden departure, the mysterious work obligations that had consumed his time. I keep thinking I'm overreacting, I finished. Maybe he really is just going through something and I should give him space. Mrs. Matthews, in my experience, men don't typically abandon their pregnant wives without a compelling reason. And that reason is usually something they don't want their wives to know about. Would you like me to look into this? 3 days later, Marcus called with preliminary findings that made my stomach clench with recognition and dread. I've confirmed that David is staying at the Marriott downtown, he said. But he's not staying alone. He's registered under a double occupancy, and hotel staff have seen him with a woman mid to late 20s. Professional appearance matches the description of Jessica Martinez. The confirmation hit me like a physical blow, even though I'd suspected it. Hearing it stated as fact made it real in a way that my suspicions hadn't. How long have they been there? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The reservation started 3 days before he left you. Mrs. Matthews, I'm sorry, but it appears this was planned in advance. Planned. The word echoed in my mind. David hadn't left in a moment of panic or confusion. He'd made arrangements, booked a hotel room, coordinated with Jessica. While I was preparing for our daughter's birth, he was preparing his exit. There's more, Marcus continued. I've done some preliminary research into their relationship. Jessica Martinez has worked as David's assistant for 2 years, but their professional relationship appears to have become personal approximately 8 months ago. 8 months. The timeline was devastating. David had begun his affair with Jessica at the same time I'd entered my second trimester, when I was dealing with morning sickness and the exhaustion of early pregnancy. While I was growing our child, he was growing closer to another woman. I need to know everything, I said, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. I need to know the truth, whatever it is. Mrs. Matthews, are you sure? Sometimes the details can be more painful than the general facts. I looked at Emma, sleeping peacefully in her bassinet, and felt a surge of protective determination. My daughter deserves to know who her father really is, and I deserve to know what I'm dealing with. Over the following weeks, Marcus's investigation revealed a pattern of deception that went far beyond a simple affair. David hadn't just been emotionally absent during my pregnancy, he'd been actively planning a different life with Jessica. The evidence was methodical and damning. Credit card records showed expensive dinners, hotel stays, and jewelry purchases that coincided with David's work emergencies. Phone records revealed hundreds of calls and texts between David and Jessica, often late at night when he claimed to be working. Email communications showed intimate conversations in future, plans that didn't include me or our unborn child, but the most shocking discovery was yet to come. Marcus called me on a Thursday afternoon, his voice more serious than usual. Double quotes, Mrs. Matthews, I need to ask you something. When exactly did David leave you? I gave him the date, burned into my memory. And when was your daughter born? 3 weeks later. Why? Because Jessica Martinez took a leave of absence from work the day after David left you. I've been trying to figure out why, and I think I may have found the answer. I'll need to do more digging, but I believe Jessica may be pregnant. The room spun around me. I gripped the phone tighter, trying to process what Marcus was saying. Are you saying that David left me for Jessica because she's pregnant too? I'm saying it's a possibility we need to explore. If Jessica is pregnant, and if the timing aligns with their relationship, it would explain the sudden urgency of David's departure. I felt sick. The idea that David had been living a double life, that he'd potentially gotten his secretary pregnant while I was carrying his child, was beyond anything I'd imagined in my worst fears. Can you find out for sure? I asked. I'll do my best. But Mrs. Matthews, I want you to prepare yourself. If this is true, it changes everything about your situation. It means David didn't just leave you, he replaced you. After hanging up, I sat in my living room, staring at Emma as she played with her tiny fists. She was innocent in all of this, a pure soul who deserved better than the chaos her father had created. The business card that had sat on my table for 3 days had opened a door I couldn't close. The truth was emerging piece by piece, and it was uglier than I'd ever imagined. But I needed to know all of it. For Emma's sake, for my own sake, and for the sake of whatever justice might be possible in this situation, I picked up my phone and called my lawyer. Jennifer, it's Sarah. I think we need to talk about more than just child support. I think we need to talk about fraud, abandonment, and whatever other legal consequences apply when a man destroys his family for another woman. The investigation had only just begun, but already I could see that David's betrayal ran deeper than I'd known, and I was determined to uncover every last detail. The bank statements arrived in a manila envelope, delivered by Marcus with an expression that told me everything I needed to know before I even opened them. Emma was having her afternoon nap, and I was grateful for the quiet as I spread the documents. Across my dining room table, I need to warn you, Mrs. Matthews, Marcus said, settling into the chair across from me. What you're about to see is going to be difficult to process. The first statement was from our joint checking account, the one we'd use for household expenses and shared financial goals. Nothing unusual there: mortgage payments, utilities, groceries, the normal expenses of our married life. But the second set of statements made my breath catch. This is an account David opened 18 months ago, Marcus explained. It's in his name only, and he's been systematically transferring money from your joint accounts into it. The numbers were staggering. Over the past year and a half, David had moved nearly $80,000 from our shared finances into this secret account. Money that should have been building our family's future, preparing for Emma's arrival, securing our life together. But this is just the beginning, Marcus continued, pulling out another set of documents. There are 3 more accounts, all opened within the past 2 years. And this one, he pointed to a statement with Jessica's name as the secondary account holder. This one shows regular transfers to Jessica Martinez. My hands trembled as I traced the transactions. $5,000 here, $3,000. They're building up to a total that made me feel sick. David hadn't just been having an affair, he'd been financing it with our money. How much? I whispered. Across all the accounts, approximately $150,000 has been moved out of your joint finances. Some of it went to support David's new lifestyle, but a significant portion, about $60,000, went directly to Jessica or was spent on her behalf. I stared at the statements, trying to make sense of the betrayal. These weren't impulsive purchases or momentary lapses in judgment. This was a systematic, calculated financial deception that had been going on for months. There's more, Marcus said gently. The timing of these transfers corresponds with some significant purchases. A lease on a luxury apartment downtown signed 8 months ago. The security deposit and first year's rent were paid from the hidden account 8 months ago. The same time David's affair had begun, according to Marcus's timeline. While I was dealing with morning sickness and planning our nursery, David was setting up a love nest with his secretary. He's been planning this for almost a year, I said, the reality hitting me like a physical blow. This wasn't a sudden decision or a moment of weakness. He's been building an exit strategy. It appears that way, yes. And Mrs. Matthews, there's something else. The apartment lease lists Jessica Martinez as the primary tenant, but David's name is on the financial guarantees. He's been supporting her living expenses while still married to you. The implications were overwhelming. David hadn't just left me, he'd been stealing from our family to support another woman. Money that should have gone toward Emma's future, toward our home, toward the life we built together had been funding his betrayal. Thought about all the times David had claimed we needed to be careful with money, how he'd suggested I reduce my business expenses or questioned purchases I'd made for the baby, all while he was secretly funneling our savings to his mistress. Can we get this money back? I asked. That depends on several factors. Since you were married when these transfers occurred and they were made from joint accounts without your knowledge or consent, there may be legal remedies available. Your lawyer will need to review the specifics. Marcus pulled out one final document, a printout of David's most recent financial activity. This shows transactions from the past 2 weeks. Purchases at a maternity store, payments to an obstetrician, and a significant deposit to a hospital. My stomach dropped. She is pregnant. The evidence strongly suggests it. And based on the timing of these medical expenses, I'd estimate she's approximately 6 to 7 months along. The math was devastating. Jessica had gotten pregnant shortly after David and I conceived Emma. While I was celebrating our growing family, David was starting another one behind my back. There's one more thing, Marcus said, his voice even more serious. I've been tracking David's communications, and there's evidence that he and Jessica have been discussing their future together. It appears they've been planning to relocate possibly to another state after both babies are born. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. David hadn't just left me for Jessica, he'd been planning to disappear entirely to start fresh somewhere else with his pregnant secretary and their child. I would have been left alone with Emma, wondering what had happened to the man I'd married. He was never coming back, I said, the words tasting bitter. All those times I hoped he'd realize what he was throwing away, that he'd want to be part of Emma's life. He was never coming back. I'm sorry, Mrs. Matthews. I know this is a lot to process. I looked at the statements spread across my table, each one representing another layer of betrayal. David hadn't just broken my heart, he'd stolen from our family, lied to me for months, and planned to abandon his daughter without a backward glance. But strangely, along with the pain and shock, I felt something else, clarity. The uncertainty that had plagued me since David's departure was gone. I now knew exactly what I was dealing with, not a confused husband going through a crisis, but a calculating man who had systematically destroyed our family for his own selfish desires. Marcus, I said, gathering the statements into a neat pile, I need you to document everything. Every transaction, every lie, every piece of evidence that shows what David has done. Because I'm not going to let him get away with this. Emma stirred in her bassinet, making the soft sounds that meant she was waking up. I looked at her perfect little face and felt a surge of protective fury. David had stolen from her future, abandoned her before she was even born, and planned to erase her from his life entirely. He chose Jessica over his own daughter, I said, more to myself than to Marcus. But he's about to learn that abandoning Emma was the biggest mistake of his life. The bank statements in front of me weren't just evidence of financial fraud. They were proof of a man's complete moral bankruptcy. And I was going to make sure everyone knew exactly what kind of father David Matthews had chosen to be. Jessica Martinez's employee file painted a picture of calculated ambition from the very beginning. Marcus had obtained it through his contacts in the corporate world. And as I read through her background, I began to understand that David's affair wasn't a romantic accident. It was a strategic campaign by a woman who knew exactly what she wanted. Jessica graduated from Northwestern with an MBA in finance, Marcus explained as we reviewed the documents in my living room. She specifically targeted David's company for employment, despite having offers from larger firms with better starting salaries. The file showed that Jessica had researched the company thoroughly before applying. She'd known about David's role, his position in the company hierarchy, and his potential for advancement. More disturbing, she'd apparently researched David personally, learning about his interests, his professional goals, and his personal life. "Look at this," Marcus said, pointing to a section of her application. She listed hiking and travel as hobbies, the exact activities David mentioned in his professional bio on the company website. She also claimed experience with the specific software David's department used, even though her previous jobs hadn't required it. Jessica had crafted her persona to appeal to David before she'd even met him. She'd positioned herself as the perfect assistant, the ideal complement to his professional ambitions, but the evidence suggested her goals went far beyond career advancement. Her performance reviews told a story of increasing intimacy disguised as professional dedication. In her first year, supervisors praised her technical skills and efficiency. By her second year, the reviews noted her exceptional understanding of Mr. Matthews' preferences and working style, and her ability to anticipate his needs. "She made herself indispensable," I said, reading between the lines. She studied David like a project and positioned herself as the solution to problems he didn't even know he had. The timeline of their relationship was methodical and disturbing. Jessica had slowly expanded her role from assistant to confidant, from professional support to personal advisor. The credit card records Marcus had obtained showed the progression. First, professional lunches that gradually became more frequent and expensive. Then evening meetings that extended well past normal business hours. Finally, weekend work sessions that clearly had nothing to do with the office. "She's smart," Marcus admitted. "She never pushed too hard or moved too fast. She let David think he was making all the decisions while she created the circumstances that led to those decisions." The most chilling aspect of Jessica's strategy was how she'd exploited my pregnancy. The timing of her most aggressive moves coincided with my most vulnerable moments, when I was dealing with morning sickness, when I was exhausted from the physical demands of pregnancy, when I was focused on preparing for our baby's arrival. "Look at this," Marcus said, showing me a printout of David's calendar. "Starting around your 5th month of pregnancy, Jessica began scheduling more evening meetings, more business dinners, more travel. She created reasons for David to be away from home when you needed him most." The evidence showed that Jessica had been monitoring our marriage, looking for weaknesses she could exploit. She'd known about our plans for the nursery, our excitement about the baby, our hopes for the future, and she'd systematically undermined all of it. She knew exactly when to offer David what he felt he was missing at home. I realized the pattern becoming clear. When I was tired and uncomfortable, she was energetic and available. When I was focused on the baby, she was focused on him. The employee records showed Jessica's salary history, but what caught my attention were the unexplained bonuses and expense account increases that had occurred over the past year. David had been using his position to financially reward Jessica's exceptional performance while I was carefully budgeting for our growing family. "There's something else," Marcus said, pulling out another document. "Jessica's previous employment history shows a pattern. She's worked for 3 different companies over the past 8 years, each time as an assistant to a married executive. And in each case, she left under circumstances that suggest personal complications. The pattern was unmistakable. Jessica, wasn't just an opportunistic woman who'd fallen for her boss. She was a serial homewrecker who targeted married men in positions of power. David wasn't her first victim, and based on her history, he probably wouldn't be her last. At her previous job, she was terminated after the executive's wife filed a harassment complaint, Marcus explained. The company settled out of court, but the records suggest Jessica had been conducting an affair with her married supervisor for over a year. I felt a mix of vindication and disgust. David's affair wasn't a unique love story or crime of passion. It was Jessica's standard operating procedure. She targeted him just like she targeted the men before him. The most damaging evidence was in Jessica's personal communications, which Marcus had obtained through legal channels as part of the investigation. Text messages between Jessica and her friends revealed the cold calculation behind her relationship with David. "I've got him wrapped around my finger," one message read. "He thinks he's making all the decisions, but I'm the one calling the shots. Poor little wifey has no idea what's coming." Another message, sent just days before David left me, was even more cruel. "D is finally ready to leave the wife. Pregnant women are so needy and pathetic. He says he can't stand being around her anymore. Perfect timing since I'll be showing soon." The messages confirmed what I'd suspected. Jessica's pregnancy wasn't an accident or complication. It was part of her strategy. She'd deliberately gotten pregnant to force David's hand, to create a situation where he'd have to choose between his families. "She planned this from the beginning," I said, my voice barely controlled. "She researched David, got hired specifically to target him, and then systematically destroyed our marriage so she could have him for herself." But perhaps the most revealing document was Jessica's application for maternity leave, filed just one day after David moved out. In it, she'd listed David as her emergency contact and had applied for the maximum leave allowed, suggesting she expected him to support her financially during her recovery. She's not just taking David, I realized. She's taking the life I was supposed to have. She wants him to play house with her and their baby while abandoning Emma and me completely. The employee file also revealed Jessica's financial situation before the affair began. She'd been living paycheck to paycheck, renting a small studio, apartment, and driving an older car. The transformation in her lifestyle over the past year, the luxury apartment, the designer clothes, the expensive dinners, had all been funded by David's theft from our family finances. "She turned David into her personal ATM," Marcus observed, "and she did it so gradually that he probably doesn't even realize how much money he spent on her." I thought about all the times Jessica had answered David's phone when I'd tried to reach him, her voice professionally polite but with an undertone of possession. She'd been gatekeeping access to my own husband, controlling when and how I could communicate with him. She isolated him, I said, understanding dawning. Every time I tried to address problems in our marriage, she was there offering him an alternative. She made herself the solution to every issue I raised. The evidence painted a picture of a woman who was ruthless in pursuit of her goals. Jessica hadn't just seduced David, she'd psychologically manipulated him, financially exploited him, and strategically dismantled his relationship with me and his unborn daughter. But looking at all the documents spread across my table, I felt something unexpected: pity for David. He'd been targeted by a professional manipulator, someone who'd studied his weaknesses and exploited them systematically. That didn't excuse his choices or diminish his responsibility, but it explained how a man I'd loved and trusted could have become someone I didn't recognize. "The question now," Marcus said, "is what you want to do with this information." I looked at Emma, sleeping peacefully in her bouncy seat, oblivious to the chaos her father had created. She deserved better than a father who could be so easily manipulated, better than a man who would abandon his family for a calculating opportunist. "I want Jessica to know that I know exactly who she is," I said. And I want David to understand what he's really gotten himself into. Because if she could do this to me, she eventually do it to him too. The legal files grew thicker each day, an expanding collection of evidence that documented the destruction of my marriage and the theft of my family's future. Jennifer Walsh, my attorney, had commandeered a conference room at her firm to organize everything, and I found myself spending hours there with Emma and her carrier, watching as the full scope of David's betrayal was methodically cataloged. What we have here is textbook marital fraud, Jennifer explained, arranging documents into carefully labeled folders. David systematically concealed assets, transferred marital property without your consent, and used joint funds to support an extramarital relationship. That gives us multiple legal avenues to pursue. The evidence was overwhelming, but Jennifer wanted to ensure we had an airtight case. She'd brought in a forensic accountant to trace every suspicious transaction, a process that revealed even more hidden transfers and unexplained expenses than Marcus had initially uncovered. Your husband was more careless than he realized, the accountant, Robert Kim, told me. He left a digital paper trail that clearly shows intent to defraud. These weren't impulsive purchases, they were systematic transfers designed to hide assets. From you. The financial analysis revealed that David had begun moving money even before his affair with Jessica became physical. He had been planning his exit strategy for over 2 years, slowly siphoning funds from our joint accounts into investments, and accounts that only he could access. The total amount is closer to $200,000, Robert reported. When you include the retirement funds he liquidated without your knowledge and the business investments he made using marital assets, we're looking at a significant theft of community property. But the financial fraud was only part of our case. Jennifer was also preparing to demonstrate abandonment, willful neglect of parental duties, and breach of fiduciary responsibility. The evidence folder labeled abandonment contained David's departure letter, records of his refusal to attend medical appointments, and documentation of his complete absence during Emma's birth and early weeks. The family court takes abandonment during pregnancy very seriously, Jennifer explained, especially when it's coupled with financial fraud and evidence of an ongoing affair. This isn't a case of a marriage simply falling apart. This is a case of deliberate destruction and betrayal. We also had to prepare for David's inevitable counter-arguments. Jennifer expected him to claim the marriage was irretrievably broken, that his departure was justified by irreconcilable differences. But our evidence showed premeditation that contradicted any claim of spontaneous relationship breakdown. He can't argue that the marriage failed naturally when he was actively sabotaging it, Jennifer said. The timeline clearly shows he was planning his exit while publicly maintaining the pretense of a committed husband and expectant father. The witness list was growing as well. My mother would testify about David's absence during my pregnancy and delivery. My business partner, Michelle, could speak to my emotional state and David's lack of involvement in preparing for Emma's arrival. Even David's own mother had agreed to provide testimony about her son's behavior. Mrs. Matthews, David's mother, is particularly valuable as a witness, Jennifer noted. She can testify that David never mentioned any marital problems to his family, that his departure came as a complete shock to everyone who knew you both. The most challenging aspect of building our case was gathering evidence about Jessica's pregnancy and her role in David's departure. We needed to prove not just that the affair existed, but that it was the primary motivating factor in David's abandonment of his family. Marcus had been working to obtain Jessica's medical records and employment history, but privacy laws made this difficult. However, public records and social media activity provided a timeline that supported our theory. Jessica's Instagram account shows a clear progression. Jennifer showed me printouts of social media posts. 6 months ago, she was posting about her career ambitions and single life. 3 months ago, the posts shifted to luxury dinners and expensive travel. And now, she's posting about new beginnings, and exciting changes ahead. The social media. Evidence also revealed Jessica's pattern of targeting married men. Her previous posts showed her at company events, always positioned near executives, always dressed to attract attention. The pattern was subtle but consistent. She's careful not to post anything explicitly incriminating, Jennifer observed, but the progression of her lifestyle and the timing of her posts create a clear narrative that supports our case. We were also preparing for the emotional aspects of the trial. Jennifer explained that family court judges were accustomed to seeing messy divorces and bitter custody disputes, that they were less familiar with cases involving such calculated deception and abandonment. Your case is unusual because it involves both significant financial fraud and complete parental abandonment, she said. Most cases have one or the other, but rarely both to this degree. The judge will need to understand not just what David did, but why it matters for Emma's future. The custody evaluation would be crucial. Jennifer had arranged for a court-appointed evaluator to assess both David and me as parents, examining our ability to provide stable, loving homes for Emma. Given David's absence from Emma's entire life so far, Jennifer was confident this evaluation would favor me. David will have to explain to a family court why he chose to abandon his newborn daughter, she said. He'll have to justify why he's been absent for every milestone, every feeding, every sleepless night. That's not an easy position to defend. The child support calculations were straightforward but significant. Based on David's salary and the income from his hidden investments, he would owe substantial monthly support for Emma. But beyond the financial support, we were also seeking reimbursement for his theft of marital assets. We're not just asking for future support, Jennifer explained. We're asking for compensation for the money he stole from Emma's future, plus punitive damages for the fraud and abandonment. As we organized the final pieces of our case, I felt a mixture of determination and sadness. The legal files represented the end of everything I'd believed about my marriage and the man I'd loved. But they also represented hope for justice, for Emma's future security, and for holding David accountable for his choices. Are you ready for this? Jennifer asked as we reviewed the complete case file one final time. Court proceedings can be emotionally difficult, especially when they involve such personal betrayal. I looked at Emma, now 3 months old, and beginning to smile and interact with the world around her. She deserved a father who would fight for her, who would prioritize her well-being above his own desires, since David had chosen not to be that. Father, I would fight twice as hard to protect her interests. I'm ready, I said. Emma deserves justice, and David needs to face the consequences of what he's done. Let's go to court. The jewelry box had belonged to David's grandmother, passed down through 3 generations of Matthew's women. When David's mother, Patricia, placed it in my hands during her unexpected visit, I knew she was giving me more than family heirlooms. She was choosing sides in a war her son had started. This was always meant for David's wife, Patricia said, her voice thick with emotion. And you're still his wife, no matter what foolish choices he's made? Patricia Matthews had driven 3 hours to see me, arriving unannounced on a Saturday morning when Emma was having her tummy time on the living room floor. I'd been surprised to see her since David's departure. I'd assumed his family would rally around him, accepting whatever story he'd told them about our marriage failing. I need you to know that not all of us believe David's version of events, she said, settling into my kitchen chair with the weariness of a woman who'd raised a son she no longer recognized. And I need you to know that Emma has grandparents who want to be part of her life, regardless of what her father has done. The revelation that David's own mother didn't support his actions was both validating and heartbreaking. Patricia had known David his entire life, had watched him grow from a boy into a man, and she was horrified by the person he'd become. When David told us he'd left you, he claimed you'd grown apart during the pregnancy, that you'd become incompatible, Patricia explained. He made it sound mutual, like you both wanted different things. He never mentioned another woman, never admitted to the lies and theft. I showed Patricia the evidence Marcus had gathered, the financial records, the timeline of the affair, the documentation of David's systematic deception. She studied the documents with the careful attention of a retired accountant, her expression growing more pained with each revelation. "My son is a stranger to me," she said finally. "The boy I raised would never abandon his pregnant wife. The man I thought I knew would never steal from his family to support another woman." But Patricia wasn't the only unexpected ally who emerged as news of David's behavior began to spread. His brother, Michael, called me directly after Patricia shared what she'd learned. "Sarah, I need to apologize on behalf of our family," Michael said. "We had no idea what David had really done. Mom told me about the money, about the secretary, about everything. This is unforgivable." Michael's support meant more than I'd expected. He and David had been close, sharing business interests and family traditions. For him to publicly condemn David's actions sent a clear message about how far outside acceptable behavior David had strayed. The ripple effects continued. David's longtime friend, Greg, reached out after running into my sister at the grocery store. He had heard rumors about David's departure but hadn't known the full story. "I want to testify for you," Greg told me over coffee. "David and I have been friends since college, and I've watched him change over the past year. The man who left you isn't the man I've known for 15 years. Greg's testimony would be particularly valuable because he could speak to David's character transformation, the way his values and priorities had shifted as his affair with Jessica intensified. He used to talk about you constantly," Greg said. "He was so excited about the baby, so proud of the life you built together. Then suddenly he stopped mentioning you at all. When I asked about the pregnancy, he'd change the subject or make excuses to end the conversation." Even more surprising was the support that came from David's workplace. Several colleagues reached out privately, offering to share what they'd observed about David and Jessica's relationship. Their accounts painted a picture of an affair that had been obvious to everyone except me. "We all knew something was going on," David's former teammate Lisa told me. "Jessica was completely unprofessional, always finding reasons to be in David's office, always volunteering for projects that put her in close contact with him. The rest of us were uncomfortable with how blatant it was." The workplace witnesses could testify about the progression of the affair, the way Jessica had monopolized David's time and attention, and the impact it had on his work performance and professional relationships. David became secretive and defensive, another colleague, Mark, explained. He stopped participating in team activities, stopped joining us for lunch or after-work events. It was like Jessica had isolated him from everyone who might question what was happening. Perhaps the most powerful ally was David's administrative assistant before Jessica, a woman named Carol, who had worked for him for 3 years before taking a position with another company. "I left because I couldn't stand watching what Jessica was doing," Carol admitted when she called me. "She made my job impossible, constantly undermining my work and convincing David that he needed someone younger and more dynamic. She orchestrated my departure so she could take over." Carol's testimony would establish Jessica's pattern of manipulation and her systematic campaign to gain control over David's professional and personal life. The support from David's own circle was overwhelming and validating. These weren't strangers taking sides in a divorce. They were people who had known David for years, who had watched the transformation that led to his abandonment of our family. "What's remarkable," my lawyer Jennifer observed, "is that no one is defending David's actions. Usually in divorce cases, we see family and friends split along loyalty lines. But in your case, even David's own people are condemning what he's done." The pattern was clear. David had burned bridges not just with me, but with everyone who had cared about him. His affair with Jessica had required him to lie to his family, deceive his friends, and abandon his principles. In choosing Jessica, he'd isolated himself from everyone who might have helped him find a better path. He's going to walk into that courtroom with no character witnesses, Jennifer noted. No family members willing to vouch for his integrity. No friends defending his choices. No colleagues supporting his version of events. That's unusual and powerful. The jewelry box sat on my dresser, its contents telling the story of 3 generations of strong Matthews women. David's grandmother had survived the Depression. His mother had built a successful career while raising her family. And now I was carrying on that legacy of resilience and strength. Emma has a family that loves her, Patricia assured me during one of her regular visits. She has grandparents and an uncle who want to be part of her life. David's choices don't change that. The unexpected allies weren't just providing emotional support. They were building a wall of testimony that would be impossible for David to overcome in court. His own family and friends were prepared to testify against him, to document his transformation from a loving husband into a calculating betrayer. You don't have to face this alone, Michael told me as we coordinated our testimonies. David might have abandoned his family, but the rest of us haven't. Emma will grow up knowing she has people who fought for her when her father wouldn't. The allies weren't seeking revenge against David. They were seeking justice for Emma and accountability for actions that had shocked everyone who thought they knew him. Their support gave me strength for the battle ahead and hope that Emma would grow up surrounded by people who valued loyalty, integrity, and love above selfish desire. The coffee shop receipt was still crumpled in my purse 3 days later. A tangible reminder of the moment I finally looked David in the eye and let him know that his carefully constructed lies were about to crumble. The meeting had been my idea one, final attempt to give him the chance to tell the truth. Before we faced each other in court, I'd chosen a public place deliberately. The small cafe near downtown was busy enough to provide privacy through background noise, but public enough to keep our conversation civil. Emma was with my mother, sparing her from witnessing what I knew would be a painful encounter. David arrived 10 minutes late, looking like a man who'd aged years in the months since he'd walked out on us. He'd lost weight, and there were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. But what struck me most was how he carried himself. Gone was the confident man I'd married, replaced by someone who looked perpetually over his shoulder. "Sarah," he said, sliding into the chair across from me. "You look good. Motherhood suits you." The casual observation felt like a slap. He was commenting on my appearance as if we were old friends catching up, not a father seeing the mother of his child for the first time since abandoning us. "You missed Emma's first smile," I said without preamble. "She laughed for the first time last week. She's starting to recognize voices and faces. Your daughter is becoming a person, David, and you're choosing not to know her." He shifted uncomfortably, unable to meet my eyes. "I know this is hard, Sarah, but the situation is complicated." "I need time to figure things out? Complicated?" I pulled out my phone and showed him a photo of Emma from that morning, her bright eyes and David's unmistakable features looking back at him. "Your daughter isn't complicated, David. She's beautiful and perfect, and she deserves a father who wants to be part of her life." For a moment, his composure cracked. I saw a flash of the man I'd married, the one who used to talk excitedly about teaching our child to ride a bike and read bedtime stories. But it disappeared quickly, replaced by the defensive stranger he'd become. "You don't understand the pressure I've been under," he said. "The expectations, the responsibilities." I needed space to breathe. Space to breathe. My voice rose slightly before I caught myself. "David, I know about Jessica. I know about the money you've been stealing from our accounts. I know about the apartment you've been paying for, the pregnancy, all of it." The color drained from his face. He looked around the cafe nervously, as if expecting to see someone watching us. "I don't know what you think you know," he began, but I cut him off. I know everything, David. I have bank statements, credit card records, phone logs, email communications. I know you've been planning this for over a year. I know you moved $200,000 of our money to support your affair. I know Jessica is pregnant with your child. He was quiet for a long moment, his hands clenched around his coffee cup. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. How did you find out? Does it matter? The question is, why didn't you tell me? Why did you let me believe that our marriage failed naturally when you were actively destroying it? It wasn't supposed to happen this way, he said, and for the first time since he'd arrived, he sounded like the man I'd once loved. I never meant for things to get so complicated. Complicated? I repeated. David, you didn't accidentally have an affair. You didn't accidentally steal money from our family. You didn't accidentally abandon your pregnant wife. These were choices, deliberate, calculated choices. He finally looked at me directly, and I saw something I hadn't expected. Shame. Real, genuine shame for what he'd done. Jessica made me feel alive again, he said. She made me feel like I could be someone different, someone better. The word came out sharper than I'd intended. Better than a husband and father. Better than a man who keeps his promises and honors his commitments. You don't understand, he said desperately. Our marriage had become routine, predictable. Jessica offered excitement, adventure, a chance to start over. I stared at him across the small table, trying to reconcile this selfish stranger with the man who had once promised to love me through whatever life brought us. Our marriage became routine because we were building something together, I said. We were creating a home, preparing for our child, building a future. That's what marriage is, David. It's not constant excitement. It's partnership through the ordinary moments. I know that now, he said, his voice breaking slightly, but it's too late. I've made my choice. Yes, you have. You chose Jessica over your wife. You chose her baby over Emma. You chose temporary excitement over lasting love. And you chose to steal from your daughter's future to fund your fantasy. He winced at each accusation, but didn't deny any of them. What do you want from me, Sarah? An apology? I'm sorry, okay? I'm sorry for all of it. I don't want your apology, David. Apologies don't undo the damage you've caused. They don't give Emma back the father she deserved. They don't return the money you stole or erase the lies you told. Then what do you want? I leaned forward, meeting his eyes with all the strength I'd discovered over the past months. I want you to face the consequences of your choices. I want you to understand that abandoning Emma was the most selfish, cowardly thing you could have done. And I want you to know that when she's old enough to ask about her father, I'll tell her the truth, that you chose another woman and another child over her. David's face crumpled. Please don't turn her against me. I won't have to turn her against you, David. Your actions speak for themselves. You've been absent for every moment of her life so far. You missed her birth, her first weeks, her first smiles. You chose not to be her father. The conversation was taking its toll on both of us. David looked defeated, crushed by the weight of his choices and their consequences. But I felt surprisingly strong, empowered by finally speaking the truth about what he'd done to our family. The court date is set for next month, I said, gathering my purse. You'll have a chance to explain your choices to a judge, to justify why you thought stealing from your daughter was acceptable, why you thought abandoning her was reasonable. Sarah, please what? Please pretend this didn't happen. Please forgive you so you can feel better about yourself. Please make this easier for you. I stood up, looking down at the man who had once been my everything. You made your choice, David. Now you get to live with it. As I walked away, I heard him call my name one more time. But I didn't turn around. The man sitting in that cafe, wasn't the husband I'd lost. He was the stranger who had destroyed my family for his own selfish desires. The receipt from our coffee, $4.75 for 2 drinks that represented the end of everything we'd once shared, stayed crumpled in my purse. As a reminder, not of what we'd lost, but of what I'd found. The strength to face the truth, to demand accountability, and to fight for Emma's future. David had expected forgiveness, understanding, maybe even reconciliation. Instead, he'd gotten the reality. He'd been avoiding that actions have consequences, that choices matter, and that some betrayals can't be undone with simple apologies. The threatening text messages started 2 days after my meeting with David. The first one arrived while I was feeding Emma her bottle, the phone buzzing insistently on the kitchen counter until I finally checked it. You need to back off and let David move on with his life. Stop trying to destroy what we have. The number was unfamiliar, but I knew immediately who had sent it. Jessica Martinez had finally decided to contact me directly, abandoning the professional distance she'd maintained throughout her affair with my husband. I screenshot the message and sent it to both my lawyer and Marcus, then blocked the number. But Jessica was more resourceful than I'd anticipated. The messages continued from different numbers, each one more desperate and threatening than the last. David doesn't love you anymore. He's with me now. Accept it and move on. Stop filling Emma's head with lies about her father. David wants to be part of her life, just not with you. You're pathetic, clinging to a man who doesn't want you. Have some dignity. The messages revealed more about Jessica's state of mind than she probably intended. The woman who had been so calculating and strategic in pursuing David was now panicking, lashing out as she realized that her carefully constructed plan was unraveling. Marcus traced the numbers back to burner phones, confirming what we'd suspected. Jessica knew she was crossing legal lines, but was too desperate to care about the consequences. She's scared, Marcus told me during one of our meetings. The evidence we've gathered shows that her entire future depends on David staying committed to her. If he changes his mind or decides to reconcile with you, she loses everything she's worked for. The financial investigation had revealed just how dependent Jessica had become on David's support. The luxury apartment, the expensive clothes, the medical care for her pregnancy, all of it was being funded by money David had stolen from our family. Without his continued financial backing, Jessica's new lifestyle would collapse. She's not just threatening you, Marcus continued. She's fighting for her survival. That makes her dangerous. The messages escalated when Jessica realized I wasn't responding to her psychological warfare. The threats became more specific, more personal. I know where you live. I know your schedule. I could make things very difficult for you. Accidents happen to people who don't know when to quit. Maybe you should think about Emma's safety. The implied threat against my daughter crossed every line. I immediately called the police and filed a harassment report, providing them with all the messages and evidence of Jessica's pattern of behavior. But Jessica's desperation wasn't limited to threatening me. Marcus's surveillance revealed that she was also pressuring David, demanding more commitment, more financial support, more assurance that he wouldn't change his mind about their future together. She's becoming increasingly paranoid, Marcus reported. She's convinced that David is having second thoughts, that he might try to reconcile with you. She's monitoring his communications, controlling his schedule, essentially holding him prisoner in their relationship. The irony wasn't lost on me. Jessica had manipulated David into leaving his family, but now she was terrified that her manipulation wouldn't be strong enough to keep him. The confident seductress who had systematically destroyed my marriage was revealing herself to be an insecure, desperate woman who knew her hold over David was fragile. David himself was beginning to show signs of strain. Friends who occasionally saw him reported that he looked exhausted, stressed, constantly on edge. The exciting new life Jessica had promised was turning into a prison of lies and threats. Jessica's pregnancy is complicating everything, one of David's former colleagues told me. She's using the baby as leverage, constantly reminding David that he has responsibilities to her and their child. But she's also becoming increasingly demanding and controlling. The text message campaign reached its peak when Jessica somehow obtained my work email and began sending messages that threatened my professional reputation. Sarah Matthews is unstable and vindictive. She's harassing my boyfriend because she can't accept that their marriage is over. Be careful doing business with someone so unethical. She had sent this message to several of my clients, clearly hoping to damage my marketing consultancy and force me into financial distress. But her plan backfired. My clients forwarded the messages to me, appalled by the unprofessional attack. This woman is clearly unhinged, one of my longtime clients said when he called to check on me. We're not going to let some jealous mistress interfere with our business relationship. Jessica's attack on my livelihood was the final straw. My lawyer filed for a restraining order, presenting the court with dozens of threatening messages, evidence of Jessica's harassment campaign, and documentation of her attempts to interfere with my business. Ms. Martinez's behavior demonstrates a pattern of escalating harassment and intimidation, Jennifer argued in court. She poses a credible threat to my client and her infant daughter's safety and well-being. The restraining order was granted, immediately legally prohibiting Jessica from contacting me, coming near my home or workplace, or interfering with my business relationships. But more importantly, it created an official legal record of Jessica's threatening behavior, evidence that would be crucial in our upcoming custody and divorce proceedings. The harassment campaign had revealed Jessica's true character in ways that no investigation could have uncovered. The polished professional who had seduced David was actually an unstable, vindictive woman who was willing to threaten an infant to protect her position. She's shown her hand, Jennifer observed. No family court judge will be sympathetic to a woman who threatens a baby and tries to destroy a mother's livelihood. Jessica's desperation has become our strongest evidence. David's reaction to Jessica's behavior was telling. According to Marcus's sources, he was horrified by the threats against Emma and had tried to convince Jessica to stop the harassment campaign. That Jessica had refused, arguing that I was trying to destroy their relationship and deserved whatever consequences came my way. This is causing serious problems between them, Marcus reported. David might be many things, but he's not comfortable with threats against his daughter. Jessica's overreach is opening his eyes to who she really is. The woman who had been so careful and strategic in destroying my marriage was now making mistakes driven by panic and desperation. Every threatening message, every attempt to intimidate me, every effort to control David was creating evidence that would be used against her in court, but perhaps most importantly, Jessica's desperation was revealing the truth about her relationship with David. What she had presented as a great love story was actually a relationship built on manipulation, control, and financial dependence. And now that foundation was cracking under the pressure of reality. The threatening messages stopped after the restraining order was served. But I knew Jessica's desperation hadn't disappeared. It had just been forced underground. The woman who had calculated my destruction was now facing the possibility of her own downfall, and that made her more dangerous than ever. The DNA test results arrived in a manila envelope marked confidential just 3 days before our court date. I knew what they would say before I opened them. Emma was undeniably David's daughter, but seeing the scientific proof printed in black and white felt like holding lightning in my hands. 99.97% probability of paternity. The document stated in clinical language that couldn't begin to capture the human drama behind those numbers. Jennifer had requested the DNA test, not because we doubted Emma's parentage, but because she wanted to eliminate any possibility that David might try to escape his responsibilities by questioning whether Emma was his child. Now, with scientific certainty established, David would have to face the full weight of his abandonment. The courthouse was imposing, all marble columns and brass fixtures that seemed designed to remind everyone of the gravity of family law proceedings. I arrived early, wanting to compose myself before facing David for the first time since our disastrous coffee shop meeting. Emma was with my mother. I couldn't bear the thought of my daughter witnessing her father's moral bankruptcy on display. David entered the courtroom looking like a man walking to his own execution. He'd lost more weight, and his expensive suit couldn't hide the hollowness around his eyes. Behind him walked Jessica, her pregnancy now clearly visible beneath a designer maternity dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. The sight of them together, the father of my child and the woman who had destroyed our family, sent a surge of protective fury through me. But I forced myself to remain calm, remembering Jennifer's advice about maintaining dignity regardless of provocation. Judge Margaret Torres was a stern woman in her 60s who had built her reputation on no-nonsense family law decisions. She reviewed our case file with the methodical attention of someone who had seen every possible variation of human betrayal and selfishness. This is a petition for divorce, child support, custody determination, and restitution for marital fraud. She read from her notes. Mrs. Matthews, please summarize your position. Jennifer stood, her voice clear and professional as she outlined our case. Your Honor, this is a case of systematic abandonment, financial fraud, and parental neglect. Mr. Matthews abandoned his pregnant wife, stole approximately $200,000 in marital assets to support an extramarital affair, and has had zero contact with his daughter since her birth 4 months ago. David's lawyer, a nervous young man who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, attempted to frame David's actions as the unfortunate result of an irretrievably broken marriage. Your Honor, my client acknowledges that the marriage ended badly, but he maintains that both parties share responsibility for the breakdown of their relationship. Judge Torres looked at David with the expression of someone examining a particularly unpleasant insect. Mr. Matthews, are you seriously arguing that your pregnant wife bears responsibility for your decision to steal money and abandon your family? Your Honor, the situation is complicated. It seems quite simple to me, the judge interrupted. You left your pregnant wife, moved in with another woman, and haven't seen your daughter since she was born. Please explain to this court how that represents shared responsibility. David's confidence visibly cracked under the judge's scrutiny. The man who had walked into the courtroom with an air of entitlement was beginning to realize that his carefully prepared justifications weren't going to work. Jennifer presented our evidence methodically. The financial records that showed David's theft, the timeline of his affair with Jessica, the documentation of his complete absence during Emma's birth and early months. Each piece of evidence was damning, but together they painted a picture of calculated betrayal that left no room for sympathy. Your Honor, Jennifer said, holding up the DNA test results. Mr. Matthews has not only abandoned his daughter, he's abandoned a daughter who is undeniably his biological child. This isn't a case of disputed paternity or uncertain circumstances. This is a case of a father who simply chose not to be a father. When David's lawyer called Jessica to testify, I watched the woman who had destroyed my family take the stand with the confidence of someone who believed her own lies. She was polished, articulate, and completely shameless. David was trapped in an unhappy marriage, Jessica testified. Sarah had become distant and demanding during her pregnancy. David needed emotional support that he wasn't getting at home. Jennifer's cross-examination was surgical in its precision. Ms. Martinez, when did your relationship with Mr. Matthews become romantic? We fell in love gradually over several months. According to your own text messages, which are exhibits 47 through 52, you told a friend that you had hooked Mr. Matthews within 3 weeks of targeting him. Does that sound gradual to you? Jessica's composure began to slip as Jennifer presented evidence of her calculated pursuit of David, her history of targeting married executives, and her systematic campaign to isolate David from his family. Ms. Martinez, you're currently 6 months pregnant. Is that correct? Yes. And according to medical records, you conceived approximately 8 months ago, which would be right around the time Mrs. Matthews was dealing with severe morning sickness during her second trimester. Did you see that as an opportunity? I don't know what you mean. I mean, did you deliberately time your seduction of Mr. Matthews to coincide with his wife's most vulnerable period during her pregnancy? David's lawyer objected, but the damage was done. Jessica's carefully constructed image as the innocent other woman was crumbling under the weight of evidence showing her predatory behavior, but the most devastating moment came when Judge Torres asked David directly about his daughter. Mr. Matthews, have you seen your daughter since she was born? No, Your Honor, but have you called to check on her health and well-being? The situation is complicated, Mr. Matthews. This is a yes or no question. Have you made any effort to contact your daughter or inquire about her welfare since she was born? The silence stretched for what felt like minutes. David looked at his lawyer, at Jessica, at everything except the judge who was waiting for an answer. No, Your Honor. And why is that? I needed time to figure out my new circumstances. Judge Torres leaned forward, her voice carrying the full weight of judicial authority. Mr. Matthews, your daughter is 4 months old. She has never met her father. She has never received a birthday card, a Christmas gift, or even a phone call from the man who helped create her. How exactly do you justify that level of abandonment? David had no answer. The man who had been so confident in his choices, so certain that his pursuit of happiness justified any collateral damage, was finally facing the moral bankruptcy of his decisions. The gavel came down with the finality of justice long overdue. Judge Torres awarded me full custody of Emma, ordered David to pay substantial child support and restitution for the money he'd stolen, and mandated supervised visitation only if David chose to exercise his parental rights. Mr. Matthews, the judge said in conclusion, you have shown a shocking disregard for your responsibilities as a husband and father. Your actions represent a complete abandonment of the most basic human decencies. This court hopes that someday you will understand the magnitude of what you've thrown away. As we left the courthouse, I felt a mixture of vindication and sadness. Justice had been served, Emma's future was secure, and David would face the consequences of his choices. But it also marked the definitive end of the life I'd planned. The family I dreamed of, the man I'd once loved. The DNA test results went into my files. Scientific proof that Emma's father had chosen to be a stranger to his own child. But more importantly, they represented hope that Emma would grow up knowing that her mother had fought for her, that justice was possible, and that some things in this world were worth fighting for. The judge's gavel seemed to echo through the courtroom long after Judge Torres had rendered her verdict. The sound represented finality, justice, and the official recognition of what I had known all along. David's actions were indefensible, and Emma deserved better than a father who would abandon her for his own selfish desires. The court finds that Mr. Matthews has engaged in woeful abandonment of his minor child, systematic financial fraud against his spouse, and a pattern of deception that represents a fundamental breach of his duties as both a husband and father. Judge Torres had said, her voice carrying the weight of absolute moral authority, the financial penalties were substantial. David was ordered to pay $4,800 monthly in child support, plus an additional $3,000 monthly in spousal support for 2 years. But more importantly, he was required to repay every dollar he had stolen from our marital assets. $200,000 plus interest and legal fees, bringing the total restitution to nearly $250,000. The court will not allow Mr. Matthews to profit from his fraud, the judge had continued. Every dollar he stole from his family will be returned with interest to ensure his daughter's financial security. But perhaps the most telling aspect of the judgment was the custody arrangement. David was granted supervised visitation rights, only and only if he chose to exercise them. The court made it clear that Emma's well-being took precedence over any theoretical parental rights David might claim. Mr. Matthews has shown no interest in his daughter's life thus far, Judge Torres had observed. This court will not force a child to have a relationship with a parent who has demonstrated such complete indifference to her existence. The aftermath of the ruling was swift and devastating for David. Within hours of the court's decision, news of the judgment had spread through his professional network. His employer, already uncomfortable with the scandals surrounding his personal life, placed him on administrative leave pending a review of his conduct. The company can't afford to be associated with someone who steals from his own family, one of his former colleagues told me. It raises questions about his integrity in all areas of his life. Jessica's reaction to the verdict was even more dramatic. According to Marcus, who continued monitoring the situation for security purposes, she had completely lost her composure when she realized the financial implications of the judgment. She was counting on David's income to support her lifestyle, Marcus reported. Between the child support, spousal support, and restitution payments, David's going to be financially devastated for years. The luxurious life Jessica thought she was getting is disappearing. The stress of the situation was taking its toll on David and Jessica's relationship. Friends reported seeing them arguing publicly, with Jessica demanding that David appeal the judgment and find ways to reduce his financial obligations. Jessica's true colors are showing, David's brother Michael told me during one of his regular visits to see Emma. She's not standing by David during his difficult time. She's angry that he can't maintain her lifestyle anymore. The pattern was predictable but still satisfying to watch. Jessica had targeted David because of his financial stability and professional success. Now that both were compromised by the consequences of their affair, her interest in him was waning rapidly. David's family had completely disowned him after the trial. His mother, Patricia, made it clear that her loyalty was with Emma and me, not with the son who had betrayed every value she had taught him. "I don't have a son anymore," Patricia said sadly but firmly. "The man I raised would never have done what David did. I'm focusing my energy on being the best grandmother I can be to Emma." The professional consequences continued to mount. David's industry connections, built over years of networking and relationship building, evaporated as word spread about his behavior. The tech community was small and close-knit, and men who abandoned pregnant wives and stole from their families found themselves persona non grata. Nobody wants to do business with someone they can't trust. One of David's former clients explained when asked about ending their professional relationship, "If he could betray his own wife and child, how can we trust him with our business?" The financial pressure was forcing David and Jessica to make difficult choices. They had to give up the luxury apartment David had been paying for, moving into a modest 2-bedroom unit that represented a significant downgrade from the lifestyle they had been enjoying. The reality of supporting 2 families is hitting him hard, Marcus observed. Between the child support for Emma, the coming expenses for Jessica's baby, and the restitution payments, David's going to be living paycheck to paycheck for years. But the most satisfying consequence was watching David face the truth about Jessica's motives. Deprived of the financial security and luxury lifestyle she had expected, Jessica began showing David the same calculating coldness she had once directed at me. She started seeing other men, one of David's remaining friends reported. "She's already looking for her next target. someone who can provide the financial stability David can no longer offer. The pattern was repeating itself just as Jessica's employment history had suggested it would. She was a predator who moved from one victim to the next, always seeking better financial opportunities and more affluent targets. David's realization of what Jessica truly was came too late to save his marriage or his relationship with Emma, but it was still grimly satisfying to watch. The woman he had sacrificed everything for was abandoning him just as readily as he had abandoned his family. He calls sometimes, Patricia told me during one of our conversations. He sounds lost, confused, like he's finally understanding what he threw away. But understanding and accepting responsibility are two different things. The court's judgment had been more than a legal victory. It was a public acknowledgement of the truth. David's actions had been systematically dissected and found morally bankrupt. His abandonment of Emma had been recognized as the cruel, selfish act it was, and his theft of our family's money had been documented and punished. Judge Torres had given David one final opportunity to speak before rendering her judgment. His words had been telling him their complete failure to accept responsibility. "I made mistakes," he had said, "but I was trying to find happiness." Mr. Matthews, the judge, had replied, "Happiness built on the destruction of others is not happiness at all. It's selfishness. And this court does not protect selfishness at the expense of innocent children." The gavel had come down with the finality of truth acknowledged and justice served. David would spend years paying for his choices, both financially and personally. But more importantly, Emma would grow up knowing that her mother had fought for her, that the legal system had protected her interests, and that some actions have consequences that can't be escaped or explained away. The truth had emerged, and with it came the satisfaction of watching a man who had caused so much pain finally face the reality of what he had done. David's resignation letter was submitted to his company 3 weeks after the court judgment. Though everyone knew it was a face-saving gesture, he would have been terminated regardless. The letter was brief and professional, giving no hint of the scandal that had prompted his departure from the career he had spent years building. "Effective immediately, I am resigning from my position as Vice President of Sales to pursue other opportunities," the letter read. But there were no other opportunities. David's professional reputation had been destroyed as thoroughly as his personal life. The corporate world was unforgiving to men who made headlines for abandoning pregnant wives and stealing family money. Within days of the court judgment, David's professional network had evaporated. Clients canceled contracts, colleagues distanced themselves, and industry contacts stopped returning his calls. "It's career suicide," his former business partner, Tom, explained to me when he called to express his disgust at David's behavior. "Nobody wants to be associated with that level of personal corruption. It reflects on everyone he's worked with." The financial consequences of the judgment were cascading through every aspect of David's life. The monthly payments he owed child support, spousal support, and restitution totaled nearly $8,000, more than many people's entire income. Without his executive salary, meeting these obligations was becoming impossible. Marcus continued monitoring David's situation, partly for security reasons and partly to ensure he was complying with the court's orders. The surveillance revealed a man whose life was disintegrating at an accelerating pace. "He's had to take a sales job at a used car dealership," Marcus reported during one of our weekly check-ins. "The pay is about 1/3 of what he was making before. He's already behind on his restitution payments." The irony wasn't lost on me. David had stolen $200,000 from our family to fund his affair and new lifestyle, but the court judgment had effectively sentenced him to years of financial hardship to pay it back. The money he had spent on luxury dinners and expensive gifts for Jessica would have to be earned back one commission check at a time, but the most satisfying aspect of David's downfall was watching his Relationship with Jessica implode under the pressure of reality. The woman who had been so confident in her conquest was discovering that David, without his executive salary and lifestyle, was a far less attractive prospect. Jessica started making demands, Marcus observed. She wants David to find ways to reduce his support payments to you so he can provide more for her and their baby. She doesn't understand that court orders aren't negotiable suggestions. The apartment David had been paying for Jessica had to be given up when his income disappeared. They moved into a cramped 2-bedroom unit in a less desirable part of town, a dramatic downgrade from the luxury lifestyle they had been enjoying with my stolen money. She's bitter about the change in circumstances, one of David's remaining acquaintances reported. She keeps talking about how David promised her a better life, and now she's stuck with a man who can barely pay his bills. Jessica's pregnancy was progressing, but instead of bringing her and David closer together, it was highlighting the financial pressures that were destroying their relationship. Doctor's visits, prenatal care, and preparations for the baby all required money that David no longer had. She started looking for other options, Marcus told me, his surveillance revealing Jessica's true nature. She's been seen having lunch with other men, clearly networking for her next victim. The woman who destroyed your marriage is already planning her exit strategy. The pattern was predictable but still satisfying to observe. Jessica had targeted David for his money and status, not for love or genuine connection. Now that both were gone, her interest in him was evaporating as quickly as it had appeared. David's family relationships had been completely severed. His mother refused to speak to him. His brother had cut off all contact, and extended family members had made it clear that he was no longer welcome at family gatherings. He brought shame on our entire family, Patricia told me during one of her visits with Emma. What he did reflects on all of us, and frankly, I'm embarrassed to share his last name. The isolation was taking its toll on David's mental health. Friends reported that he looked increasingly haggard, stressed, and defeated. The confident, successful man who had once commanded respect in boardrooms and social settings had been replaced by someone who looked perpetually worried and defensive. He's aged 10 years and 6 months, one former colleague observed. The stress of supporting 2 families on a fraction of his former income is crushing him. And Jessica's not making it any easier. The professional consequences extended beyond just losing his job. David's industry was small enough that his reputation preceded him everywhere he applied for work. HR departments Googled his name and found news articles about the court judgment, the affair, and the financial fraud. Nobody wants to hire someone with that kind of baggage, a recruiter explained when asked about David's employment prospects. It's not just the moral issues, it's the financial obligations. Employers worry about desperate people making desperate choices. Jessica's own situation was becoming increasingly precarious. Her leave of absence from work was ending, but her position at David's former company was no longer tenable given the scandal. She was facing unemployment while 7 months pregnant and tied to a man whose earning potential had been destroyed. She's starting to panic, Marcus reported. She's reaching out to former contacts, trying to find new employment, but her reputation has been damaged by association with David. Everyone knows what role she played in destroying his family. The luxury lifestyle that Jessica had worked so hard to obtain, the expensive apartment, designer clothes, fine dining, and professional networking, had disappeared as quickly as it had arrived. The woman who had felt so superior to me, so confident in her victory, was discovering that her triumph was built on a foundation of stolen money and lies. David's trying to hold on to her, Marcus observed, but she's clearly checking out of the relationship. She got what she wanted from him, the experience of wealth and status, and now she's ready to move on to her next target. The resignation letter that David had submitted marked more than the end of his career. It symbolized the complete destruction of the life he had tried to build with my stolen money. Every aspect of his existence was unraveling, from his professional reputation to his financial stability to his relationship with the woman he had. Sacrificed everything to obtain that Emma, oblivious to the chaos her father had created, continued to thrive. At 6 months old, she was hitting every developmental milestone, surrounded by love from family and friends who had rallied around us. The contrast between her bright future and David's disintegrating life couldn't have been more stark. The man who had once seemed so powerful, so in control of his destiny, was learning that actions have consequences that can't be avoided or minimized. His choice to abandon his family for temporary pleasure was proving to be the most expensive mistake of his life, with payments that would continue for years to come. Anna's first birthday invitation was printed on cream cardstock with soft pink borders, featuring a photo of her bright smile and curious eyes that still reminded everyone of David, though in her case, those features represented hope and possibility, rather than betrayal and disappointment. Anna's first birthday celebration, the invitation read, "Join us for cake, laughter, and celebrating one amazing year of joy." Planning the party felt like both a milestone and a declaration. 1 year ago, I had been a devastated woman abandoned by her husband during pregnancy. Now I was a confident single mother surrounded by people who genuinely cared about Emma and me, building a life that was fuller and more authentic than anything I'd had during my marriage. The guest list reflected the new community we'd built. Patricia and Michael, David's family members who had chosen loyalty over blood. My sister and parents who had traveled from across the country to be part of Emma's special day. Friends who had rallied around us during the darkest months, proving that chosen family could be stronger than biological ties. "I can't believe how much she's grown," Michelle, my business partner, said as she helped me hang streamers in the backyard. "And look at you, glowing. You look happier than I've seen you in years." The observation was accurate and surprising. Despite everything I've been through, the betrayal, the legal battles, the financial stress, I was genuinely happy. The life I was building with Emma was more fulfilling than the marriage I'd lost. My marketing consultancy had not only survived David's departure, but thrived in ways I hadn't expected. The focus and determination I developed during the legal proceedings had translated into professional success. Clients appreciated my resilience and strategic thinking, and word-of-mouth referrals had grown my business beyond what I'd achieved while married. "You're more decisive now," one longtime client had observed during a recent strategy meeting. "You have a clarity about priorities that serves your clients well. Whatever you've been through has made you a better businesswoman." The financial security from David's court-ordered payments had allowed me to invest in both Emma's future and my own professional development. I'd hired an assistant, upgraded my office technology, and even began exploring opportunities to expand into new markets. Emma herself was the center of our new world, a bright and engaging baby who charmed everyone she met. She was crawling confidently, pulling herself up to standing, and showing signs of the strong personality that would serve her well in life. "She's fearless," my mother observed, watching Emma navigate the baby-proof living room with determination. "She doesn't hesitate to explore or try new things. That's going to be an asset as she grows up." The birthday party was held in our backyard, the same space where David and I had once planned to watch our children play. But this celebration was better than anything I could have imagined during my marriage. Genuine, joyful, filled with people who were present by choice rather than obligation. Patricia arrived early, carrying a wrapped gift in the same jewelry box she'd given me months earlier. "This is for Emma when she's older," she said, placing a small wrapped package on the gift table. It was my mother's, David's great-grandmother's first piece of jewelry. Every Matthews woman should have something that connects her to the women who came before. The gesture was touching and significant. Patricia was ensuring that Emma would have a connection to her paternal family history, even if her father had chosen to be absent from her life. "Has David said anything about today?" I asked, partly curious and partly concerned that he might try to disrupt Emma's celebration. Patricia's expression darkened. He mentioned it, but only to complain about the expense of the gift he felt obligated to send. He doesn't understand that showing up and being present would mean more than any purchased item. David had sent a gift, an expensive toy delivered by courier with a generic card, but had made no attempt to attend or even call. His absence on his daughter's first birthday was a choice that spoke volumes about his priorities and character. His loss, Michael said firmly when he arrived with his family. "Emma has more people here who love her than many children see at their parties. She doesn't need someone who can't appreciate what an amazing little girl she is." The party itself was perfect in ways that had nothing to do with expensive decorations or elaborate planning. Emma delighted in the attention, crawled between guests collecting smiles and hugs, and approached her first birthday cake with the enthusiasm of someone discovering sugar for the first time. "Look at her face," my sister laughed as Emma grabbed handfuls of cake and explored the texture with scientific curiosity. "She's completely focused on figuring out this new experience." Friends took photos and videos, creating a record of Emma's special day that would remind her in years to come of how loved and celebrated she was. The images showed a happy baby surrounded by adults who had chosen to be part of her life, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. "You've built something beautiful here," Jennifer, my lawyer, said as she watched Emma interact with her guests. "This little girl is going to grow up knowing she's valued and cherished. That's a gift more precious than anything money can buy." The emotional centerpiece of the day came when I stood to thank everyone for being part of Emma's life. Looking around at the faces of people who had supported us through the hardest year of my life, I felt overwhelmed with gratitude. "A year ago, I thought our family was broken," I said, my voice carrying across the backyard. "I thought Emma would grow up missing something essential because her father chose not to be part of our lives. But looking at all of you, I realized that Emma has something better than what I originally planned. She has a family chosen by love rather than accident, built on loyalty rather than obligation." The party lasted well into the evening with guests reluctant to leave the warmth and joy of the celebration. Emma fell asleep in my arms as the last friends were saying goodbye. Exhausted but content from a day filled with love and attention. As I carried her upstairs to her crib, I reflected on how much had changed since the night David had walked out on us. The woman who had felt broken and abandoned had been replaced by someone stronger, more independent, and more confident in her ability to create happiness. "Happy birthday, sweet girl," I whispered as I tucked Emma into her crib. "You've given me more joy in 1 year than I had in 5 years of marriage. Thank you for teaching me what real love looks like." The birthday invitation went into Emma's baby book, along with photos from the party and cards from everyone who had celebrated with us. It would remind her that her first year of life had been marked not by loss, but by love, the kind of love that shows up, stays present, and chooses to be part of a child's story. David's absence from Emma's birthday was his choice, but it was also his loss. He was missing out on watching his daughter grow into an amazing little person, missing the opportunity to be part of her life, missing the chance to experience the pure joy of unconditional love. Our new beginning was better than anything I could have planned or imagined. It was built on truth rather than lies, supported by people who showed up rather than those who made excuses, and centered on a love that was freely given rather than conditionally offered. Emma's first birthday marked not just her milestone, but ours, the completion of a difficult year, and the beginning of a future filled with possibility. The final divorce decree arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by certified mail with the official seal of the family court embossed in gold. After 18 months of legal proceedings, investigations, and emotional turmoil, our marriage was officially dissolved, and with it came a sense of closure I hadn't expected to feel so deeply. Matthews v. Matthews, Final Decree of Divorce. The document read in formal legal language that reduced 5 years of marriage to a series of property divisions, custody arrangements, and financial obligations. The terms were comprehensive and final. I retained full physical and legal custody of Emma, with David granted supervised visitation rights that he had yet to exercise. The house, my business, and my retirement accounts remained mine. David was required to continue his monthly support, payments, and restitution for another 8 years, ensuring Emma's financial security through her 18th birthday. "It's over," Jennifer said when she called to confirm I received the decree. David can't appeal the financial judgments, can't modify the custody arrangement without proving significant change in circumstances, and can't escape his obligations. To Emma, "You're free to move forward with your life." The supervised visitation provision was both necessary and sad. The court had mandated that any contact between David and Emma occur only in the presence of a neutral third party, acknowledging the reality that David was essentially a stranger to his own daughter. "He's never requested a visit," the court appointed. Supervisor had told me during our final meeting. In the 18 months since these arrangements were established, Mr. Matthews has made no effort to see his daughter. It's unusual for a parent to completely abandon their visitation rights. David's absence from Emma's life had become so complete that she didn't even ask about him. At 18 months old, she was walking, talking, and developing her own personality, without any input or influence from her biological father. The man who should have been teaching her to say "Daddy" was a complete stranger to her. The financial restitution was proceeding on schedule, though David's reduced circumstances made each payment a struggle for him. The monthly checks arrived, like clockwork, processed through the court's collection system to ensure compliance. "He's working 2 jobs now," Marcus reported during one of our final check-ins. The used car dealership during the day and weekend shifts at a retail store. He's barely making ends meet, but he's staying current on his obligations. The contrast between David's current situation and the lifestyle he'd enjoyed while stealing from our family was stark and satisfying. The man who had once dined at expensive restaurants and bought luxury gifts for his mistress was now working retail to pay child support for the daughter he'd abandoned. Jessica had, predictably, moved on to her next target. She'd given birth to David's second child, a son, but had quickly realized that a financially devastated man working multiple jobs wasn't the provider she'd envisioned. She left him when the baby was 3 months old, Marcus informed me. She's already involved with a new man, another executive, married, same pattern as before. David was now a single father himself, struggling to care for an infant while working 2 jobs and paying support for the daughter he'd never met. The irony was profound. He was experiencing a fraction of what I'd gone through as a single parent, but without the support network or financial resources I'd managed to maintain. He looks completely broken, one of his former colleagues who occasionally saw him at the used car lot told me. The confident, successful man we used to know is gone. He seems like he's just going through the motions of living. The supervised visitation arrangements remained in place, unused but available. Emma's court-appointed advocate had made it clear that if David ever chose to exercise his parental rights, the process would begin slowly, with short visits designed to gradually introduce him to the daughter he'd abandoned. "The door isn't closed," the advocate explained, but Mr. Matthews would need to demonstrate genuine commitment to being a father, not just guilt about missing out on his daughter's life. The psychological evaluation that had been part of the custody proceedings painted a troubling picture of David's mental state and decision-making capacity. The court-appointed psychologist had concluded that David showed signs of narcissistic personality, traits and an inability to prioritize his children's needs over his own desires. Mr. Matthews appears to view relationships as transactional, the evaluation noted. His abandonment of his daughter suggests a fundamental inability to understand unconditional love and parental responsibility. The financial fraud investigation had revealed even more hidden assets and secret accounts, adding to the restitution David owed. The final total exceeded $275,000, ensuring that his financial obligations would continue well into Emma's teenage years. Every hidden dollar was documented and added to his debt, the forensic accountant explained. Mr. Matthews will be paying for his deception for the next decade. The decree also included provisions that protected Emma from future manipulation or abandonment. David could not claim her as a dependent on his taxes, could not make decisions about her education or medical care, and could not remove her from the state without court permission. We've built a wall of legal protection around Emma, Jennifer noted. David can't disrupt her life on a whim or use her as a pawn in any future relationship drama. The most significant aspect of the final decree was the acknowledgement of David's complete abandonment. The court had officially recognized that he had voluntarily relinquished his role as Emma's father through his actions, making any future claims to parental rights extremely difficult to establish. Abandonment is hard to prove legally, Jennifer explained, but David made it easy by documenting his own absence from Emma's life. No court will force a relationship that a parent chose to reject. The decree arrived just days before Emma's second birthday, marking not just the end of my marriage, but the completion of my transformation from abandoned wife to empowered single mother. The legal document represented justice served, responsibilities acknowledged, and consequences enforced. I placed the decree in my filing cabinet next to all the other documents that told the story of David's betrayal and its aftermath, the private investigators' reports, the financial fraud evidence, the threatening messages from Jessica, the court transcripts. Together, they formed a complete record of what happens when someone chooses selfishness over family. "Do you feel closure?" my therapist asked during one of our sessions that week. "I feel justice," I replied. David faced consequences for his choices. Emma's future is protected. And I've proven to myself that I can not only survive betrayal, but build something better from the ashes. The supervised visitation provision would remain in place indefinitely, a standing offer for David to attempt to build a relationship with his daughter. That given his complete absence from her life so far, it seemed more like a legal formality than a realistic possibility. Some fathers who abandon their children try to return when the children are older, the court advocate had warned me. Usually when they want to feel better about themselves or when they face social pressure from new relationships. The supervised visitation requirement protects Emma from that kind of emotional manipulation. The financial arrangements would continue for 16 more years, a constant reminder to David of the family he'd destroyed and the daughter he'd chosen to abandon. Every monthly payment would be a consequence of his decision to prioritize his affair over his responsibilities. "He'll be paying child support longer than he was married to you," my mother observed with grim satisfaction. 16 years of monthly reminders of what his choices cost him. The final decree also protected my business and professional life from any future claims David might make. The success I'd built during and after our divorce was mine alone, free from any entanglement with the man who had tried to destroy our family's financial stability. The document concluded with standard language about the finality of the judgment, but to me, it read like a declaration of independence. I was free from David's lies, free from his manipulation, free from the fear that he might return to disrupt the life Emma and I had built together. That evening, I sat in Emma's nursery, watching her sleep, holding the decree that had officially ended the most painful chapter of my life. She was growing into a confident, joyful toddler who knew nothing. of the chaos that had surrounded her birth and early months. "You're free too, sweet girl," I whispered. "Free from a father who couldn't love you enough to stay, free from the dysfunction he would have brought into your life, free to grow up surrounded by people who chose to be here." The divorce decree went into my safe deposit box alongside Emma's birth certificate, insurance policies, and other important documents. It would stay there as proof that justice was possible, that consequences were real, and that sometimes the end of something painful was actually the beginning of something beautiful. David had lost everything: his family, his career, his financial security, his reputation, and his relationship with the woman he'd sacrificed everything to obtain. The supervised visitation rights he'd been granted remained unused, a daily reminder of the father he'd chosen not to be. The final decree wasn't just a legal document, it was validation that Emma and I deserved better than what David had offered, and that we had the strength to build it ourselves. The man who had abandoned us thinking we couldn't survive without him had unknowingly given us the greatest gift possible, the freedom to discover how strong we really were. Emma's baby book sits on my nightstand now, its pages filled with photos, milestones, and memories that tell the story of a little girl who has known nothing but love since the day she was born. The book chronicles her first 2 years of life, the smiles, the steps, the words, the birthdays, creating a record of joy that stands in stark contrast to the chaos that surrounded her arrival. "Mama," she said clearly this morning, reaching up from her crib with the confidence of a child who has never doubted that someone would be there to lift her up. At 2 years old, Emma is walking, talking, and developing into a remarkable little person with David's dark hair and my stubborn determination looking back at everything we've been through. I'm struck by how the worst thing that ever happened to me became the catalyst for the best thing. David's abandonment forced me to discover strengths I didn't know I possessed, to build relationships based on choice rather than obligation, and to create a life more authentic than anything I'd experienced during my marriage. The woman who sat in that courtroom 2 years ago, 8 months pregnant and devastated by betrayal, was someone I barely recognize now. She was broken, lost, and struggling to imagine a future beyond her pain. The woman I've become is confident, independent, and grateful for the lessons that came wrapped in the worst experience of my life. "You've transformed," my sister observed during her most recent visit, "not just survived, transformed. You're stronger, more decisive, more yourself than you ever were when you were trying to be the perfect wife." The transformation didn't happen overnight. It came through months of choosing to get up every morning despite the pain, choosing to fight for Emma's future despite the overwhelming odds, choosing to believe that we deserve better than what David had offered. Each choice built on the previous one, creating a foundation of resilience that surprised even me. Emma will grow up knowing her story, not the sanitized version that protects her from difficult truths, but the real story of how her mother fought for her when her father wouldn't. She understands that families come in many forms, that love is demonstrated through actions rather than words, and that sometimes the people who choose to be in your life are more valuable than those who are there by accident of birth. "Will you tell her about David?" my mother asked recently, watching Emma play in the backyard where we'd held her first birthday party. "I'll tell her the truth," I replied. That her father chose not to be part of her life, but that choice was about his limitations, not her worth. She understands that she was wanted, planned for, and celebrated by everyone who mattered. The financial security David's court-ordered payments provide has allowed me to focus on what truly matters: being present for Emma's childhood, building my business, and creating the stable, loving home I'd always wanted. The money he stole has been returned with interest, ensuring Emma's college fund is robust and her future is secure. But more important than the financial justice is the emotional freedom we've gained. Emma will never wonder if her father truly loves her because his absence makes his priorities clear. She won't grow up walking on eggshells around a man who might abandon her again. Won't learn to accept less than she deserves from the most important relationship in her young life. She's confident, Emma's pediatrician noted during her last checkup. Children who feel secure and loved carry themselves differently. Emma shows all the signs of a child who knows she's valued. The extended family we've built is more loving and supportive than the nuclear family I'd originally planned. Patricia, David's mother, is a devoted grandmother who never misses an important milestone. Michael, David's brother, is a wonderful uncle who treats Emma like his own daughter. My business partner, Michelle, has become an honorary aunt, and my closest friends have formed a network of support that ensures Emma is surrounded by positive influences. She has more people who love her than most children ever experience, Patricia said during our recent conversation. David's absence is his loss, not hers. The supervised visitation option remains available but unused. David has never requested to see Emma, never sent a birthday card, never made any effort to be part of her life. His child support payments arrive monthly through the court system, but they're processed transactions rather than personal connections. Some fathers come back when their children are older, the family advocate had warned me, usually when guilt or new relationships prompt them to try to reconnect. The legal protections we've put in place ensure that can't happen without careful consideration of Emma's best interests. My business has thrived beyond anything I achieved while married. The focus and determination that carried me through the legal battles translated into professional success. Clients value my strategic thinking, my reliability, and my understanding that sometimes the most difficult decisions lead to the best outcomes. You approach problems differently now, one longtime client observed. You're not afraid of conflict or difficult conversations. You tackle challenges head on instead of trying to avoid them. The skills I developed during the darkest period of my life, research, strategic planning, emotional resilience, and the ability to see through manipulation serve me well in both business and personal relationships. I trust my instincts now in ways I never did during my marriage. Emma's baby book will eventually include the story of how she got her name, not just that it means universal or whole, but that she made me whole in ways I hadn't realized I was broken. She gave me purpose during the hardest months, motivation to fight when I wanted to give up, and hope for a future I couldn't yet envision. You saved me as much as I saved you, I tell her during our quiet bedtime moments. You taught me what real love looks like, unconditional, unselfish, and unafraid. The legal documents from our case sit in my safe deposit box, but they're historical artifacts now rather than active concerns. David continues to pay his obligations, continues to work multiple jobs to meet his financial responsibilities, continues to live with the consequences of his choices. But those consequences no longer define my daily life. Looking ahead, I see possibilities that didn't exist during my marriage. The freedom to make decisions based on what's best for Emma and me, rather than what might prevent conflict with a selfish partner. The opportunity to model strength and independence for my daughter. The chance to build relationships based on mutual respect and genuine care. What do you hope for Emma's future? My therapist asked during one of our recent sessions. I hope she grows up knowing her worth isn't determined by whether someone chooses to love her, I replied. I hope she understands that she deserves partners who show up, friends who stay loyal, and relationships built on truth rather than convenience. David's betrayal, as painful as it was, gave Emma and me something invaluable, the knowledge that we can survive anything together, that we don't need anyone who doesn't want to be part of our lives, and that the strongest families are often those forged by choice rather than biology. The final page of Emma's baby book will include a letter I'm writing for her 18th birthday. explaining how her first years taught me that love isn't just an emotion, it's a decision you make every day, a commitment you honor through actions, and a gift you give freely without expecting anything in return. Emma is growing up surrounded by people who chose to love her, who stayed when things got difficult, who celebrated her milestones and supported her growth. She understands that family isn't just about shared DNA, it's about shared commitment, shared values, and shared presence during both ordinary moments and extraordinary challenges. Our story isn't the one I planned, but it's the one we needed. And as I watch Emma sleep peacefully in her crib, surrounded by photos of people who adore her, I know that sometimes the most beautiful families are the ones that rise from the ashes of broken dreams to become something better than anyone originally imagined.